Hello everybody. Today I'll discuss about construction of Christian identity and the idea of the Holy Land, which is seen as a sacred space in the northern periphery. The Sawley war map in the 12th century England. In medieval cartography, there are two main traditions for depicting the world: Mappe Mundi and Portolan charts. Cartographic descriptions of peripheral regions conflates historical narratives and cultural accounts. Therefore, toponyms, ethnonyms, and horonyms on medieval war maps are more reliable than literary text for identifying geographical objects. These were interpreted not only in a geographical way, but also as a cultural and religious description. In geographical terms, a war map can look inaccurate and very simplistic, and therefore we must not see these maps by using modern cartographic criteria. The medieval war maps can be seen as a mental description of physical places, often having a religious background. They were never meant to be used as navigational charts, which appears in the mid-13th century in Italy and later in Spain. There is not much geographical accuracy in these maps. Rather, they were a kind of both religious and secular encyclopedia and were meant to illustrate different contemporary realities. In some cases, the authors of these maps were not interested in the representation of physical reality, but rather in that of a religious reality. Beside the religious aspects of these war maps, we must focus also on the secular aspects of their creation. Indeed, the tradition of making such kind of maps originated in church institutions and clerical writings, but their visual language was adapted for use in medieval political thinking. In the 13th century, a new type of war maps developed as a main maritime tool for navigation. Known as Portolan charts, they are described as having a sophisticated system consists of different groups of signs, starting with nautical signs such as scales and visualization of winds in four directions, geographical signs for hills, mountains, lakes, and rivers, and so on. The Sawley map, formerly known as the Henry of Mainz map, has been variously dated from 1150 to the early 13th century and is regarded as the earliest surviving English map of its group, along with other war maps such as Ebstorf or Hereford. The author may have been an Anglo-Saxon mapmaker in the encyclopedic tradition of scholasticism, combining classical, biblical, and contemporary information. As for the location of the manuscript, scholars argue that it was made at Durham Cathedral Priory and then transferred to the Cistercian Abbey of Sawley in Yorkshire as a kind of cover at the beginning of the 13th century. The inscription with the name Sawley is rubbed at the very top and confirm the provenance of the map. Some English copies were addressed to a certain Christianus, while others which were made in the later centuries do not mention the name Honorius, but Henricus, who appears as the editor of the book. Furthermore, was thought that the author could be a certain Henry, probably a canon of Saint Mary's Church in Mainz, or Archbishop Henry himself. The influence of Old Norse can be detected on the Sawley map, which shows the word Norway in the vernacular form Norea. It is possible that the author of the map has combined some basic knowledge of Old Norse and Old English with rumors of an insular Scandinavia cultivated by the Carolingian and Anglo-Saxon geographical narratives. The form Norea is composed of the vernacular Noregr and the Old Norse toponymic element A, which could refer to an island. Gansmere, the island connected to Norea, appears with the same name on the Hereford map. The name might be a corruption of Skansia, Skansia, Scania, Scandia, or Skanza, all of them designating the southernmost province of present-day Sweden. From antiquity to medieval times, the coastal area stretched from the east coast of Jutland to the Vistula River, maps have been known as the Sinus Codanus. Thus, Sinus Codanus may be the first Latin name for the Baltic Sea. According to Pomponius Mela, who lived in the 1st century AD, Codanus Sinus is a huge bay lying beyond the Albis River. In this large maritime space are located many islands. In Mela's description of Europe, Albis is the Elbe, which flows into the North Sea. The large islands would be the ones grouped in the southwest of the Baltic Sea, stretching from Jutland to Vistula. Scandinavia is not seen as a peninsula, but as the largest island from this archipelago, which is Kodanovia. It is possible that Kodanus was an archaic endonym that refers to the inner Danish water seen as a river or a bay. There is not the only case when an author used the term Dana or Danus for a river. The first example of this case, it's like Procopius of Caesarea, which tells that the Po River in northern Italy was also called Eridanus, because it starts from the Celtic territory. When he mentioned about a Saxon attack in Gaul in the 6th century, Paul the Deacon used a second name for the French river Rhone, which is Rodanus. The same name also appears on the Sawley map as a river which starts from the Alps, the Swiss Alps, and flows into the Mediterranean Sea. Therefore, Codanus, used by Pliny and Mela, was not an original Latin term for the Danish Sinus, but probably an Indo-European endonym. In opposition to the inhabited Christian word, Orbis Terrarum, the surrounding sea was often described as a large non-human realm, called Alter Orbis by Pliny. On the Sawley map, Sinus Germanicus was drawn not as a terrestrial region, but as a maritime space, that is, the Baltic Sea. The Baltic islands marked on the map are considered insulae extra orbem positiae, islands placed outside the world. This does not mean that the entire population on the island was not Christian or was isolated from the Christian oikumene. In some islands, there may not have been a religious and secular administration, but only small communities of farmers and merchants. Between the 10th and the late 11th century, on some Danish southern islands like Møn, Lolland, and Falster, the pagan Wends, especially the Rugiani from Rugen, organized raids. On the Sawley map, the direct connection of the Baltic Sea with the location marked island might be explained by the fact that from 1150, the Iceland Diocese of Skalholt was a suffragan of the Archdiocese of Hamburg-Bremen. From about 1104, it became a suffragan of the Archdiocese of Lund, and from 1153 of Nidaros, which is Trondheim in Norway. By connecting Iceland to Sinus Germanicus, the author of the map might emphasize the legitimacy of Hamburg-Bremen in Partes Aquilonis, which is the northern parts, in general, and Iceland in particular. The first mention of the name of the Baltic Sea, Mare Balticum, was made by the 11th century German chronicle, Adam of Bremen, who is quoting Einhard. However, the origin of the word Baltic comes from Pliny, whose narratives include information derived from Xenophon of Lampsacus. The medieval authors of Mappe Mundi made only limited use of the description offered by Pliny, who mentions Scandia as being an island. These authors inherited the ancient idea of Iceland existing in the Northern Ocean, which was a terra incognita for them. Besides the geographical details of the Sawley map, there are some interesting symbols which needs to be discussed. We agree that in some cases, the sizes and shapes of islands depended on non-geographical factors, and therefore, the authors of these war maps have the tendency to transform the image of space into a personal opinion about the world. There are scholars who suggest that this tendency could be used as a learning or memory tool for some special occasions, and therefore The world maps can be placed within the medieval realm of memory. For example, in the center of the Sawley map, we have the Greek island of Delos, drawn as a big circle, surrounded by other smaller islands of the Cyclades. A similar depiction is the island name Orcades, which is Orkney Island, located in the northwest between Sinus Germanicus and Britannia Insula. Both Scandinavia and Iceland as islands and Norway as a peninsula are clearly located and linked together as the main locations in the north, at a close distance from the Orcades. All these locations that make up the Northern European space are visibly linked to the territories of the Holy Roman Empire, where the Archdiocese of Hamburg-Bremen is located. A river marked Danus is the natural border between the Danes and the Saxons. This could be the Eider, the river which, according to Adam of Bremen, was the political border between Denmark and North Albingia, which was part of the Duchy of Saxony. Eider starts near Bordersholm in Holstein and continues to the southwestern outskirts of Kiel, on the shores of the Baltic Sea, and then to the west, ending in the North Sea, or, as Adam called it, the Frisian Sea. Most likely, Danus related to Melasco-Danus, the huge bay lying beyond the Albis River, Elbe, which also flows into the North Sea. Therefore, the author of the Sawley map does not call the bay Sinus Codanus, the Danish bay, but Sinus Germanicus, emphasizing the German ecclesiastical legitimacy over the Danish church. From the middle of the 10th century until 1104, the Diocese of Lund was the suffragan of Hamburg-Bremen. In 1104, Lund became an independent archdiocese, initially covering Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. In 1154, the Archdiocese of Nidaros, Trondheim, was founded, which included the Norwegian diocese, Greenland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, the Orcades, and the Hebrides. In Sweden, the Diocese of Sigtuna was symbolically transferred in 1130 to the former pagan center of Uppsala, and in 1160 became an autonomous archdiocese of Sweden. Between Sinus Germanicus and Orcades, in the western part is marked a square territory, which bears no name. If we look closely on the map, we can see that Orcades is not depicted exactly the same as the Greek island of Delos. The first difference is related to the number of small circles drawn around the two islands. If for the Greek island of Delos we have 12 circles, while for Orcades only 9, the second detail is more evident because the circles are grouped at a similar distance from each other and from the large circle in the middle. For Orcades, the circles are disproportionately grouped and at an unequal distance from the main island. If Delos is placed in the middle of the sea, at a considerable distance from the mainland, Orcades is relatively close to the shore. To the west of Orcades, at a distance somehow similar to that of the two small peninsulas, we have two long and narrow islands of almost equal size. The first one is Britannia Insula, Great Britain, and beyond of it, Hibernia. What is interesting is that on the Sawley map, Hibernia, which is Ireland, is depicted as a kind of geographical doubling, placed in parallel with Britannia. Between them, we can see a drawing of lower clarity, symbolizing another circular island, surrounded by two small circles on each side. The partially erased small circular island could be a previous replacement of the Orcades, the Hebrides, the Island of Man, and the Faroes. It was stated that the island of Delos may symbolize a geographical center of the world, which transferred the identity of the ancient Hyperboreans who live beyond the North Wind to the Scandinavians, Celts, and the Anglo-Saxons. In the process of geographical relocation of places of historical significance, religion played an essential role. Adam of Bremen was the first author who connected the northern history and geography to the Christian rhetoric. The genealogy of the northern people described as barbarians goes back to the Carolingian tradition about the Saxon wars. Later, this label was inherited by the new Christians, Saxons, as well as the Scandinavians, and applied to other pagans from the Baltic Sea region, like the Wends. Adam's work seems to be a compilation of some texts from the Bible, the Roman historians and geographers, classical poets, early Christian authors, Frankish writers, the annals of monasteries, and the hagiographies of Ansgar, Willehad, or Rimbert, all of them being also Archbishop of Hamburg-Bremen. On Sawley map in the Mediterranean, at the tip of Italy, we have depicted a barking dog's head bearing the inscription Scilla. Below we can see 6 circular drawings. Above Scilla, not so far from Sicily, is another drawing representing a mythical sea creature named Charybdis. In Greek mythology, Scilla is a female sea monster described with 6 dogs' heads, wrinkled her waist. She is well known for her ferocity, which consists of attacks on the ships of passing sailors, seizing them with each of her heads. Over time, the place where Scilla dwells has been associated with the Strait of Messina between Italy and Sicily. We know that in most of the medieval war maps, the central position of Jerusalem as a sacred land made possible the spread of His Holiness to the neighboring lands. If we go further to the edge of the map on the left side, we have the Terra Incognita, which was an extreme climate and usually it was inhabited by monsters, legendary animals, and exotic peoples. The wild nature of the north is manifested not only because of the extreme cold weather, but also because of the customs of people inhabiting it. The sacrality of Delos has its origin in Greek Olympian mythology. On Sawley map, both Orchids and Delos are surrounded not by other smaller islands, but by dog-head Kynocephali. In Greek mythology, there are patterns in which dogs are closely related with commerce and gods. Delos was considered a sacred island, first because it was the birthplace of Apollo and his sister, Artemis. Second, the island hosted several sacred places which had religious and economic functions. It is likely that one of the main sacral symbols of Apollo and Artemis was the dog and the wolf. In a Greek myth, Artemis and Apollo were born in Delos, on a mountain named Hintos, which included the dog stem. The sanctity of the two spread to other surrounding Greek cities, for instance in Argos, where Apollo was called Lykios or Lykeos, which could be translated as wolf. In an anthem to Artemis, we find that one of her epithets was Scyllakitis, which means protectress of dogs. At Gauron, a deme of ancient Attica, her priestess celebrated a festival called Hieron Kynekesion, which means festival of the dog establishment. The dog and the wolf, as sacred symbols for Apollo and Artemis, share similar attributes such as loyalty, trust, strength in battle, but also revenge, ferocity, and cruelty to enemies. These attributes proved to be useful tools for medieval Christian authors when describing certain people outside the Christian community. Thus, the Kynocephali were ultimately derived by medieval authors from the work of Iulius Solinus, the 3rd century adapter of Pliny's natural history. Therefore, the identity of non-Christian was constructed by the missionary writers, whether by persuading many of the utility of Christian identity or by assimilating pagans to Christian identity by military means. In some medieval war maps, The Kinokephali, for example, were associated not only with the Northmen, heathens or Christians, but also with Muslims. The Kinokephali are first located in the extreme north in the 7th century cosmography of Atticus, Easter, who argued that the Kinokephali Saint Christopher came from such a race. Kinokephali are located in the north also in some later war maps such as Beatus, early 9th century, Hereford, early 14th century, and the works of Persian geographical astronomer and physician Zachariah al-Qazvini, late 13th century. In Gesta Caroli Magni, Notker stated that the term Kinokephali was used by Charlemagne to describe the northern, known for their sporadic brutal attacks on the island of Lindisfarne in the 9th century. An interesting case is the Frankish monk Ratramus, died in the late 9th century from the Benedictine Abbey of Corbie, who was concerned about the possibility of encountering the Kinokephali in his travels to the north. His records are also relevant because he highlighted the human origin of Kinokephali, giving the term a pejorative meaning. Furthermore, he saw them as being not mythical creatures, but rational humans who domesticate animals. As the world evolved through exploration, evangelization, and trade, the dog-headed man would come to be located in ever more obscure and unknown regions related to some ecclesiastical centers. Kinokephali were seen as a separate gens from all other Christian population. Thus, the allusion between disobedient subjects and dogs has been used in the context of the religious and political apostasy of the Wends, who, like the Danes, kill Christians and destroy Christian churches. The Sawley map is oriented to the east. The words Orient and Paradise can be seen at the top. The oval map is graced with 4 angels in each corner, which emphasize the apocalyptic events preceding the Last Judgment. In Christian eschatology, the 4 angels symbolize the nations which are in the 4 corners, wings of the earth, and they appear after the Lamb has broken the 6th seal. In the book of Revelation, it stated how Satan is to be imprisoned for 1,000 years and how, on his release, he will gather the nations in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to a final battle with Christ, his saints, and his angels. Therefore, the 4 angels represent the 4 winds. We can consider that the author of the map looks forward to the apocalypse and Christian judgment, emphasizing the end of space and time, where there will be no need for geographers and any kind of maps where certain locations are linked. For the medieval man, Jerusalem was not only the center of the world, but also the heart of spirituality and the sacred destination of humanity. We can consider that the medieval war maps shows various regions on different nature and therefore their intention are to transmit hidden knowledge carried out by the biblical quotation. The author of the Sawley map appears to have strong eschatological expectation, since he uses a religious name for an island depicted in a similar way to Delos, the holy birthplace of Apollo the Hyperborean, and one of the traditional Greek centers of the world. During the second half of the 6th century, the Orkney Islands, inhabited at that time by the Picts, were targeted by the Celtic missionaries guided by Saint Columba. In the 9th century, the Vikings from Norway invaded the islands and made them the headquarters of their expeditions against the island of Scotland and England. The Norwegians continued to control the island until 1468, when finally passed them to the Scottish kings. Between the 9th and 10th century, most of the clerical writings regarded the Vikings the Viking invasion in Britain and Ireland as being a divine retribution. Therefore, the wild Vikings may come from a terra incognita inhabited by Kinokephali like the Orcades. This perception of the Northmen is confirmed by a 9th century surviving tombstone from Lindisfarne, on the coast of Northumbria, which seems to depict the Viking attack from late 9th century, 8th century, sorry. The tombstone was erected over the grave of a victim of one of the Viking raids in which the monastery from the island were destroyed. There we can see a last judgment scene carved on the other side. Therefore, on the Sawley map, the Orcades appears at a close distance to Britannia Insula in Hibernia and has a direct navigable corridor with what the Scandinavian word means to the author. The symbolic attributes of sacrality are closely related to the imaginary. In our case, Kinokephali are not the Christian Scandinavians, but the pagan Vikings, who frequently attack Christian lands. Therefore, they were depicted separate and placed very close to Scandinavia, in a peninsula which could be Jutland. On a runic stone in Jelling, central Jutland, the royal seat of the first Danish kings, the name Denmark appears for the first time. The stone was placed in 1950 by the King Gorm the Old in memory of his wife, Hira. Gorm, worm in Latin, is described by Adam of Bremen as a savage worm, Delissimus vermis, because he was hostile to the Christian people and drives out priests of God from its towns, Denmark, and also torturing them to the death. In conclusion, we may note that the Northern Europe was seen not as a marginal area, but rather as a mental periphery, in contrast with the Christian oikomene. In medieval thinking, the connection between ancient mythology and theology was common. Often, the construction of Christian identity took place on some extent on the skeleton of Greek-Roman history and mythology. This is obvious, since the Greek-Roman world was the fertile ground in which the Christian faith rooted and spread. In other words, certain myths and legends have not been separate from reality in medieval Christian thinking. Of course, this complex mechanism varied depending on the political and economic context of the time. Some attributes of ancient gods were assimilated by the Christian writers and used as tools in the construction of Christian identity. Superstitions were easier to follow than the teachings of the Church. This was common in the northern regions, which did not have a strong Christian history. This measure had both the role of strengthening the fragility of Christian faith in the northern dioceses and of emphasizing the ecclesiastical authority of the archdiocese to which they were subordinated. Thank you for listening to me, and I wish you a pleasant day.